What's up, everybody? Welcome back once again to another episode of Upset Alert. It is episode number 66 of the Ultimate College Football Podcast, celebrating all 130 teams in FBS. Now, of course, that comes as always with the caveat that 76 teams will be the number that are actually participating in fall football in the FBS this year. So things will be certainly a little different, smaller pool of teams to choose from here, but things will still be very exciting. We've still got lots and lots of exciting college football ahead of us. So that's something to look forward to. And actually, we are coming right up on the start of the college football season as I record today on Monday, August the 31st. We are just 3 days away from FCS football kicking off on Thursday, September the 3rd. We've got some football on Saturday as well, and then the following week, Power 5 football gets folded into the mix. So really exciting stuff as we continue this final sprint toward the end of the college football season here. To this point on our show, for those of you who have not been listening to this point, first of all, welcome. Second of all, we have been ranking every single team in college football worst to first and then previewing every single game on their 2020 schedule. So we have made our way all the way to number 1. This is the day I have been waiting for so long. This has been a months-long project that I've taken on. So just want to shout out every single one of you for coming along on this journey with me. For those of you who started way back on episode 1 or episode 0 even, our methodology episode, or way back in episode 1 when we talked about teams like the University of Texas at El Paso, who I still think to be the worst team in college football this season. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on this journey, whether you listen to one episode, whether this is your first one, or whether you've listened to every single one. I really, really appreciate it. This has been a complete passion project of mine that I would have done probably anyway if 0 people listened to it. But I am very excited to say that we are nearly at 1,000 downloads for the podcast at this point across all podcast services, and that is not counting any views that we've gotten on YouTube now, any views that we've gotten here live on Twitch when we've started this over the last week or so. So just really, really humbled and grateful to you all for checking out the podcast. I will continue to do it throughout the college football season this year and beyond. Of course, we will do we'll move our format a little bit. We've been doing a daily podcast over the last couple of months, predicting these games for each team as we rank them. And we'll move to a twice weekly format rather than the daily format, both for my own sanity and just for yours as well. Makes the show a little less time consuming for you all. So we'll move to a twice weekly format. What we're going to do is today is our last episode of the daily podcast, like I said, leading up to the kickoff of the college football season. But what we'll do is take tomorrow off, and then let's see, what day would that be? Wednesday. I have to remember what day of the week it is. I think this year has done that to all of us, throwing off our concept of time a little bit. So we'll take tomorrow off, and then Wednesday will be our conference championship and college football playoff prediction special. So if you want to send in your college football playoff or conference championship predictions, send those in at Upset Alert Pod on Twitter. If you are friends with me on Facebook or Twitter, anything like that, feel free to comment on my stuff there and send them my way as well. Or if you want to drop them, if you're in Twitch, of course, we'll be recording that live as well on twitch.tv/robotbraineater, where we are streaming live right this very second. So if you would like to join in the chat, there is still plenty of time. Come drop your predictions for Clemson on today's episode, and then Wednesday's episode rather, for the conference championships and college football playoff predictions. So thank you guys again. I won't spend too much time being too mushy here. and we will continue rolling right along. Of course, we are talking some Clemson football today. Really exciting stuff. I'm really excited to talk about Clemson today. Um, should be something. Should be somebody that we can all agree for the most part is going to be a really really good football team in 2020. They have been over the last several seasons. So it's hard to imagine Clemson straying too far from what they have been in terms of a perennial college football playoff, just kind of a staple, right, of the college football playoff. They're there every year. The road to the national championship, regardless of if they win it or not, it runs through Clemson, South Carolina, in one way or another. So let's talk about Clemson here. Let's jump right into it. I've been getting more and more long-winded over the last few episodes as we get into these serious college football playoff contenders. But bear in mind, we'll get into some nitty-gritty of some playoff scenarios, some conference championship scenarios on Wednesday's episode that we're doing. So for today, we'll try to keep it strictly Clemson, try not to get too far into the weeds, and we will try our best to be respectful of your time as well. Clemson's website unfortunately doesn't have too much of the breakdown of last year's schedule in the way that a lot of teams do. However, fortunately, they didn't have a lot of variety in their results last year, so you don't really need the breakdown so much. They were 14-1, of course, undefeated until their last game when they were eliminated from the college football playoff by none other than the national champions, LSU. So, let's take a look down this schedule, though, kind of starting early on. Georgia Tech was the first game of the year for this Clemson squad. Of course, that was a blowout, 52-14. We'll see a lot of those on there, so we'll kind of speed through those. This Clemson-Texas A&M series over the last couple years wasn't too bad. Clemson won this one 24-10 at home. They had a fairly close game the year prior over in College Station, Texas, as well. But not too much to talk about there still. Texas A&M, I think, is a decent football team. Not a great football team, but you like that 14-point win probably regardless for Clemson. They won 41-6 against Syracuse. Really nothing to mention there. A huge blowout. Another one against Charlotte, 52-10. Their biggest test of the regular season came against North Carolina. This was played in Chapel Hill, so at North Carolina in late September. This was actually kind of one that you saw coming as maybe the potential upset type game for Clemson there, simply due to the fact that North Carolina got off to a decent start last year. They beat South Carolina to kick off the season. They had some early success under head coach Mac Brown, and you kind of had some positive momentum going for the Tar Heels coming into this game. And so if you're looking on here for a potential game, Florida State, of course, was terrible last year. You could look at someone like Louisville, maybe as a potential candidate to keep it close against Clemson as far as their ACC schedule goes. It's been Syracuse in the past, obviously was not the case last year. So really looking on here, I think you just say, why not North Carolina? Was kind of my feeling coming into the game, and North Carolina, sure enough, did turn out to put up quite a fight. It was 21-20, the final in that, if I recall, and if anyone's live in the chat on Twitch that might know more than me, they can correct me if I'm wrong. If I recall, Clemson was winning 21-14, and North Carolina scored a touchdown and went for two. If I remember correctly, I think they went for two to go for the win rather than try to take it to overtime, and they did not convert that 2-point conversion. I may be wrong on that. Someone correct me. I'm sure they will, if not in the chat now, then later on social media. But regardless, a great football game. That was Clemson's kind of one major test in their ACC schedule last year. They then had a bye week prior to that game that used to be a big matchup against Florida State. They, of course, beat the brakes off the Seminoles 45-14. a 45-10 win against Louisville, and Louisville's not a bad team, so that's really impressive actually there. 59-7. I mean, these are just bloodbaths. That one against Boston College. 59-14 against FCS Wofford. 55-10 at NC State. 52-3 against Wake Forest, and that's not a bad Wake Forest offense. So really, it's just getting uglier and uglier. 38-3 at South Carolina. Of course, we all know South Carolina beat Georgia last year, but outside of that game, they were terrible. They were 4-8 overall out of the SEC East, and they really didn't get off the bus to play their in-state rival Clemson Tigers. 62-17 against Virginia in the ACC championship game. This has been kind of a farce over the last few seasons, right? The ACC championship game, because it's just been, hey, Clemson is going to be in there and somebody's going to be in there. Y'all just draw straws and see who gets to get demolished by Clemson in that ACC championship game. That's pretty much been the vibe of it the last few seasons, because there hasn't been any real competition out of the ACC Coastal Division. Last year, Virginia got off to a little bit of a hot start, cooled off towards the end, and this team just was never going to compete with a Clemson. It was not close at all, obviously, 62-17. So Clemson rolls into the college football playoff at 13-0. Of course, there they matched up in the first round with Ohio State. I think the sexy picks last year in the college football playoff were LSU and Ohio State. Those two teams were absolutely crazy last year, all through the regular season and including into their conference championship games, of course. LSU was so dominant coming into that playoff. Ohio State was not far behind that pace. Clemson was a team that started off maybe a little less sexy looking in terms of some of the numbers they were putting off early in the season. But it's just because they didn't play the same level of competition as LSU or Ohio State. So it was a weird year in that you get three undefeated teams that are Power 5 conference champions coming into that playoff. Really fascinating because we haven't really seen much of that in recent memory. You know, a lot of these Power 5 schedules, you're starting to get some big out-of-conference games scheduled every year, so you see more one or maybe even two lost teams getting talked about as potential college football playoff teams. So 3 undefeateds last year, of course. Clemson and Ohio State, the 2 and 3 seeds, play each other at the Fiesta Bowl. Clemson comes out on top 29-23. They then move on to the Mercedes-Benz Superdome, of course, right in the LSU Tigers' backyard. They lose this one 42-25, just to put up 25 and to hold this LSU offense to 42, if you can call it holding to that amount. I think you consider a moral victory maybe, because this LSU team was not going to be stopped by anyone. That was their year last year, no question about it. They were just a head and shoulders ahead of everyone else, I think, last year, and it was just LSU's day. Clemson was a great football team, of course. Most years they probably would have won that national championship, but LSU was just that darn good last year. So let's move into 2020 here, and we're taking a look at the 2020 schedule. Now, of course, the ACC is playing the one out-of-conference game on their schedule this year, so you see the Citadel on there, but you're talking about, you know, a pretty jam-packed schedule for the most part in terms of what could you possibly expect. The ACC is still one of the weaker Power 5 conferences, but when you're playing 10 ACC games, you pretty much get the highlights in there. There are some decent teams in the ACC this year, and Notre Dame joins into the fray to kind of bolster this conference's strength a little bit as well. Clemson and Notre Dame, of course, were already scheduled to play this year as part of Notre Dame's kind of, I guess, the 5 games that they normally play. against the conference every season this year, playing a full schedule against the ACC, though. So let's take a look at Clemson's schedule here. Saturday, September the 12th, they're going to be at Wake Forest. And I have to tell you, when we predicted Wake Forest's schedule back when we were predicting a full 12-game schedule, I was pretty high on Wake Forest, actually. Relatively, I would say. Relatively high on Wake Forest, being maybe 7-5, something like that in a 12-game schedule. But I've cooled off on them significantly. The primary reason of that being that Sage Surratt, the guy who I have touted as the best wide receiver in college football coming into this season, he opted out. He's headed for the NFL draft. He's not playing this fall. They lose Jamie Newman, of course, transfer quarterback to Georgia. So Wake Forest, the bulk of their offense last year was that connection between Newman and Sage Surratt. They've got other wide receivers that can make plays out there, but they're replacing their quarterback. They're replacing their best wide receiver. And the offense was the stronger side of the ball for the Demon Deacons last year. So I'm not too sold on Wake Forest. Certainly not sold on them having any kind of competitive game against Clemson on that Saturday. I like the Tigers to win by a whole lot. That's going to be one of those blowout games where they put up, I think, 50 or more. Saturday, September the 19th against the Citadel. FCS, the Citadel, they're bad, right? I mean, they don't belong on the field with Clemson. This is actually a team we've seen upset, I think, South Carolina and Georgia Tech within the last 5 years or so. Clemson is not those two teams. Clemson is miles better than South Carolina and Georgia Tech put together. Clemson's 2-0. We scroll down here. October the 3rd. Clemson hosts the University of Virginia, an ACC championship game rematch from last year. Virginia will not even be as good as they were last year, and last year they didn't belong on the field with Clemson. They really didn't belong in a conference championship game. It's kind of a shame for the ACC, I think, that team was one of their representatives in their conference championship game. Virginia will take a step back further from that just because of some of the talent that they are replacing this coming season. Clemson will not have trouble on October 3rd. They get off to an easy 3-0 start. Saturday, October 10th comes the first somewhat legitimate challenge of the season for the Tigers. They will be hosting the Miami Hurricanes. Now, just as a friendly reminder here, because we did have some shifting around when the Big Ten, of course, and Pac-12, etc., exited the fall FBS season, we had some shifting around of our rankings. So Miami is a top 25 team now in our rankings because we, unlike I believe it was the AP poll, are just using teams that are playing. So Miami is number 23 on our preseason poll headed into the season. They're a pretty decent team. I don't think that this is a team that really is going to compete with Clemson, but if you're looking at this schedule, other than the obvious Notre Dame game later in the season, if you're looking on here, looking for a game where someone could surprise, be competitive with Clemson, it's either Virginia Tech or Miami. I tend to have more faith in Virginia Tech. Miami I just don't have a ton of faith in. I don't think that team's going to do much better than 500, if at all, this season. So I like Clemson to continue to roll. That is 4-0 there. We head on to October 17th at Georgia Tech, the notoriously not hostile environment of Bobby Dodd Stadium will be even less hostile with limited fans in attendance. It might actually be the normal home attendance for them in Atlanta this season if they're at 20% or so. Clemson will have those 20% out of the stands by halftime. That's going to be ugly. Clemson continues to roll. They are 5-0, I think, at this point, coming into their matchup on October 24th versus Syracuse. Syracuse, same story. They are bad. They're not great. They're probably a little better maybe than that Georgia Tech tier, but they are still a far below average team even by ACC standards. Clemson is 6-0, baby. We're not wasting our time on these boring games. Clemson versus Boston College. Boston College is a little better, so they're almost climbing the ladder like they're playing Mortal Kombat in an arcade. They're making their way, and the opponents get a little tougher each time over these few games here. So Boston College maybe a slight step up from Georgia Tech, and still not a great team though. Clemson will continue to roll there. They're still undefeated. Clemson at Notre Dame. If you're playing Mortal Kombat, working your way up the tower, then Notre Dame, I think, is the final boss, right? Really, for Clemson in this season. They've got 3 games after this, of course, that they're not going to sleep on, but Notre Dame is the toughest game of the regular season. And in this weird year where there's no divisions and they're just taking the 2 best winning percentage by the conference schedule, of course, teams out of the ACC and sending those 2 to the ACC championship game, it could be Notre Dame and Clemson again in the ACC championship game, regardless of what happens in this game. Clemson at Notre Dame. It is so interesting to me. And South Bend, rather, is where this game will be played. I like this Notre Dame team. I mean, they're a top 10 type team without a doubt. I do hate buying into the Notre Dame hype, but I have to tell you that looking at Notre Dame's schedule, there's not a ton of games that I expect them to lose this year, kind of previewing what they might do in terms of a rematch with Clemson if they make it there. This is almost a tough one to call for me because Notre Dame is hosting the game, because I do think they're a really good football team. We've seen Clemson and Notre Dame have great games before, but I am giving the edge to the Tigers here because I really think this Tigers team is another college football playoff type team. They are a consensus preseason number 1 for a reason. All 14 polls that we used in our preseason aggregate poll picked Clemson to be number 1, including yours truly. We picked them number 1. So there's a reason why, right? Clemson is returning so much talent this year. They have one of the best quarterbacks in the country in Trevor Lawrence. They have one of the best running backs in the country in Travis Etienne. They have wide receivers to throw to, and they have stars all over the defensive side of the field. This is just one of the most complete college football teams coming into a season you will ever find. Clemson and Ohio State were 1 and 2 in pretty much everyone's polls. Coming into the preseason, Ohio State has dropped out, so you have to say this is Clemson's national championship to lose. It is Clemson versus everybody, and if they don't win it, it will be because they dropped the ball in a game like Notre Dame or in a game possibly further down the road that we'll get to. But I like Clemson to win this Notre Dame game despite being on the road. I think they pick up that win in their most important regular season game there. Clemson at Florida State, Saturday, November the 21st, after a bye week. Florida State, I do think, will improve. I think they'll improve on the offensive line, which has been their biggest problem over the last couple of seasons. Biggest reason, I think, why they have stepped so far back out of the limelight in the ACC. They've got a couple years before they are truly back to where they were back in 2013 when they won the national championship, or at least even in that neighborhood. But this team is going to be on the rise, I think. Not this year, though. Not in 2020. It's not their time to beat Clemson yet, even though it is a home game. I like the Tigers. They continue to roll. Pitt at Clemson the following week, November 28th. I simply don't think Pitt has it in them. That's maybe a team that could make it a little closer with Clemson than it should be, but I don't think this team simply has the talent. The talent disparity is too great. Clemson, of course, one of the most talented teams in all of college football, if not the most. And then the regular season finale, Saturday, December the 5th at Virginia Tech. In a regular season, this is a very tough place to play. I don't know, of course, what the outcome will be in terms of fans. Give us a second here. We've got to pause the stream, guys. What is going on? Apologies for the brief delay there. Someone was banging on my door. I had to see what was so urgent. It was just a package that I didn't have to sign for. So we'll resume the recording here. Apologies for that. So of course I don't know what the outcome will be in terms of fans or anything like that. Virginia Tech, normally one of the toughest places in the ACC to go play. When the stadium is rocking, they get Enter Sandman going there in Blacksburg. But obviously that's not something that we anticipate happening this season. So it will be a little bit of a shame that this game won't get to have the atmosphere that it deserves. But this is a pretty good Virginia Tech team. And this is actually, I think, because it comes right before the conference championship game. Virginia Tech, by the way, at number 22 in our preseason poll. This is a Virginia Tech team that I do think is capable of maybe not springing the upset, but putting a scare in Clemson like North Carolina did last year. The upset is possible. It's definitely on the table here, but I'm going to hold off on predicting that. I do think Clemson rolls all the way to 11-0 through their regular season here. I know that's not very shocking, very surprising or anything like that for me to say, but you know, this kind of what it is. Clemson is just a really, really good football team, and I just can't imagine them really losing to anyone that's on their regular season schedule, quite frankly. You can envision a scenario where they lose to a Notre Dame or to a Virginia Tech, but this is not going to be a team that loses a bunch of games this year, if any. So quite frankly, I think Clemson is an 11-0 team this year. I think when you look at the floor for them, this is the highest floor that I think any team in college football has, because I don't see Clemson going worse than 10-1. 9-2 even, you would feel like disaster struck at some point along the way for Clemson. I just think this team is so deep, so talented. They return so much from last year. They're such a known commodity. It is hard to bet against Clemson this year, and I think for that reason they go 11-0 and roll all the way to the ACC championship game, which will pretty much wrap us up for episode number 67 here of Upset Alert. Because Wednesday, like I said, we'll be back talking about those conference championship games. And just to give you an idea of what we'll be talking about, I'll give you a quick sneak peek. I don't have the group of fives in front of me, but based on the predictions that I've made to this point in the season, we're probably talking about Alabama and Georgia, Clemson and Notre Dame, and Oklahoma and Texas. Those are three huge games, I think. And interestingly, all three would be regular season rematches because of the expanded conference play this year. And interestingly, maybe more so than that, is all three of those games were actually scheduled on the regular SEC schedule this year. So in theory, all three of those games could have happened outside of the Notre Dame one, of course, because they just were allowed to participate essentially in the ACC championship game. So it's really going to be interesting. It's going to be something taking a look at this season and how things shake out. That's kind of where I stand on everything, though, as far as who's going to be in those Power 5 conference championship games. Of course, we now know the full rankings that we've done for the preseason. And what we'll do is we'll post some screen grabs on our Twitter at Upset Alert Pod later on today when the podcast posts to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all that good stuff. We'll post some screen grabs of our entire rankings so that you can get an idea of those teams that did not make the cut for the top 25. How close were they? For those of you who didn't get a chance to go back and check out some of those episodes, you'll get the full rankings. And for those that might just want to know, where did Ohio State? Where was Penn State? Where was USC? Where was Oregon? Where were all those guys ranked? Since they're not playing this season, we'll have them still in there. I'll try to make it as uncomplicated for you all to read as possible. Normally, I just focus on as long as I can read it, it's okay. But I'll try to put that list out there for you all in a way that's as not confusing and easy to understand as possible. But until Wednesday, we will pretty much wrap it up. Like I said, for episode number 67, thank you again to everyone for listening to the podcast, whether this is your first episode or your 67th episode. I greatly appreciate you taking your time to put into this podcast. It would mean the world to us if you, on your podcast service of choice, hit that subscribe or follow button. And if you want to take the time to leave us that 5-star review as well, it helps us tremendously to get more eyeballs and more ears on the podcast so we can continue improving this content every single day for you all. Again, I appreciate you greatly. We're Upset Alert Pod on Twitter. If you want to give us a follow on there, twitch.tv/robotbraineater. If you want to check us out on there when we are live streaming, and you can hop in the chat so I can read your comments out live on the air. Thank you so much again for listening. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And until Wednesday, we will see you just 3 days from the start of the college football season.